Gene,
Hey, Bill.
how's it going, man?
It's going good. As you know, I've been getting ready to fly out to Shanghai for a longevity conference. That should be interesting.
Very cool, man, and that's cool. That get you ready for Supply Side Global, which we're only about 6.5 weeks away from.
That's
Can you
right.
believe it?
It's
Coming up. Yeah.
So
So for our audience, I think since Gene's going to be gone basically the next 2 weeks, we won't be back on the podcast until early October. And then again, probably at Supply Side like we did last year. So Gene and I will share the details once we've finalized that.
once we have the details.
Yeah, and that's the plan so far for the next 2 months anyway. So today's episode, I didn't get a chance to send it out ahead of time, a preview of what we were going to do, but obviously this podcast will be available later for those who miss it. And today's topic is inflammation, calming the fire within with nutraceutical science.
Yeah, big deal for a lot of people.
Absolutely, and especially for aging populations and all that.
Oh yeah,
it's an important thing to consider and to dive into. So. So we'll start here with introducing the concept. It's a big topic, right? And there's a lot of ingredients right. There's a lot of ingredients that can impact in this area. There's a lot of biomarkers involved in this in terms of that. And I think we'll go through the types of inflammation. Acute versus
chronic.
Inflammation is actually good for your body to a point.
It is. That's why. One of the times, I think on one of our podcasts, I mentioned that there was some mushroom tea product out there claiming no more inflammation, which is absurd in any case, but also not a good idea. You need inflammation as part of your immune system, but it's when it gets sort of out of control that it becomes problematic.
Exactly.
And in addition to a disease state, right? Arthritis, what have you. Of course, there's inflammation that's like, I'm working out and I overdid it a bit, so now I have some inflammation. And then there's things like colder weather is associated with higher levels of inflammation. Eating a crappy diet, junk food and stuff, you'll get inflammation. You may not have a disease or medical condition, but your baseline levels of inflammation will be higher. So any problems you do have, inflammatory problems, are going to be worse, right?
That's right. And so we have a question for you guys to think about as we deep dive in the subject. Is your body's fire a friend or foe as you age? So that's something to think about. And that'll lead. Let's first talk about the market, Gene. It's a pretty sizable market, believe it or not. The inflammation-specific supplements category.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think everyone understands, but let's clarify that you obviously can't make claims to. On inflammation,
for
disease
the most
claims.
part, you can't. The only thing you can do, you could say things like helps reduce inflammation associated with overexercising. In other words, the FDA says you can't be vague about it. You have to be very specific that it's a non-disease state. And
exactly.
So that's the problem. That's the limitation.
So there's a, that's a separate topic in terms of how to make claims in the space. It depends what you have, but we're going to talk about the real science behind that. It is a big market, $9.3 billion this year. And by itself. And sorry, the Empire was coming in there. So anyway, but by 2035, they're looking at 19.9 billion, and that's a CAGR 7.9%. So that's
pretty
significant.
Decent.
Pretty decent growth. And I'm not sure if that was a global number or whatever, but in the U.S. it's estimated at 19 billion in 22. So it's much higher in the U.S. due to population size and all that, of course. And that's going to grow to 32.9 billion. Anyway,
that's amazing.
Lots of drivers for that, though.
Right.
We have our aging consumers are looking for alternatives.
And that's very much the market. And it's funny because, we're baby boomers, and, you know, now it's not just the baby boomers. Now we have the
Right.
Gen Xers. The Gen Xers, hey man, they're starting to notice joint issues. They're starting to
Yeah.
notice some of these other things.
A little bit slower
Oops.
waking up in the morning.
Yeah,
you
a little
know.
more achy. These things happen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are our parents' generation as well. I have
Yeah.
parents in their 90s, and, you know, they're very, very healthy in most ways. But you know what? You get to be that age, you're going to have some inflammation. It just happens. So they try to mitigate
Yeah.
it to the extent they can with things like what we're talking about today.
Yeah, exactly. And it cuts across lots of places. Your brain function, joint, obviously joints or inflammation. Like I said, I feel that I go heavy workout in the gym. I feel that the
You
next
feel it.
morning much more than I used to, in my 20s.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little bit different getting up in the morning, but still, it's still good to have that as part of your healthy lifestyle for sure, because all of that is advantageous. If you don't,
Well,
you sit
yes.
around, you're gonna. It's like the analogy I use: if you're sitting around, you're gonna rust, and you're gonna it's gonna be worse for you.
Well, but you've put your finger on it here. You say when you go and you work out a little, heavy duty, you get that
Yeah.
inflammation. But that's an acute inflammation, right? And you said
Yeah.
earlier, acute versus that sort of chronic
Chronic,
situation.
exactly.
Right? And that's, I
Yeah.
think, a good thing to. I mean, if you've got an infection, you want inflammation. You want that drawing blood
Yeah.
and stuff to the areas to help with the healing.
Exactly.
All these things, mobilizing immune cells, clearing pathogens, that whole process. It may not be pleasant. You may get some redness and swelling, but that's necessary, and it's short term, relatively speaking, right? That's the
Right.
acute.
That's the acute inflammation. That's right. And then chronic inflammation is when that kind of process goes a little too far, right? It occurs when the body's alarm system doesn't switch off, right? And
That's right.
instead of resolving immune responses, they can become low grade systemic and long lasting.
They can.
So
Yes.
some of the drivers for that are poor diet, stress, environmental toxins, inactivity. That's what I was
That's right.
talking about.
Rusting.
You can't rusting. Yeah, let's call it rusting. Obesity and age, right? And
Right.
what that results in is tissue damage. The repair mechanisms are impaired and increased vulnerability to disease. So, actually did some research in this some years ago, actually at university. Cancer metastasis, how cancer spreads, is an inflammatory process. It's a chronic inflammatory process, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of inflammation we don't want to have in our bodies, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
So what I think this is something I've always, tried to clarify with people in terms of understanding the differences, because if you're listening to this and you're a consumer and you hear inflammation, you might think, oh no, that's bad. And so that's why we wanted to call out the distinctions between acute and chronic, because
That's right. It
isn't
isn't
all
bad in itself. But, to your other points, we have that term we use sometimes, inflammaging, because it is kind of a silent accelerant of aging as well as chronic
Exactly.
illness. And
Exactly.
so you want to do what you can to reduce that. You find, I don't know that there is a disease process out there that doesn't have some roots or some aspect of it that is inflammatory in nature.
That's right. And that's a good segue into who are the molecular players in inflammation, because obviously they work in different aspects in the body here. So we can go through those one by one here. So the first is NFKB, okay, which stands for nuclear factor kappa light chain enhancer of activated B cells. Holy cow, what does that mean?
So NF kappa beta, good enough.
NF kappa beta is good enough for me. Do I have to know what it stands for? No, but it's let's simplify that. It's the master switch of inflammation. Okay,
Yeah.
It's the thing that gets turned on in an inflammatory process. When it's overactivated, NFKB increases the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines and enzymes. Okay, which can push us into that chronic inflammation stage, so to speak.
Right. Now, our next group is cytokines, like
Right.
interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, or C-reactive protein. So, like interleukin 6 is seen elevated in situations of chronic stress, and it's linked to being more fragile in aging populations.
Exactly.
Tumor necrosis alpha promotes systemic inflammation. It's you think of a joint disease, joint degradation, as
Right.
well as insulin resistance. So we have diabetes and metabolic syndrome involved as part
Yeah.
of the consequences of tumor necrosis alpha, or as part of it. And then
Right.
C-reactive protein. Now, that is widely used as a biomarker for systemic inflammation. If you've gone to
Yeah.
your doctor and they've maybe done some blood tests, you may see CRP on there, wonder what that is.
Yeah.
Well, that's C-reactive protein, and that
Yeah.
does measure systemic inflammation, and elevated levels often correlate with, cardiovascular disease.
And now that you mentioned C-reactive protein, actually, I'm the PI or principal investigator for a clinical study right now on a supplement product. I'm working with a company to help them get it into the U.S. market. But that is the one blood test that we're actually going to do as part of the clinical study because it can help give us a lot of indicators about processes going on in the body. And again, this is under the umbrella of healthy aging, the study, right? So if we see increased levels or decreased levels or downregulation of that biomarker, that's going to be a positive sign in the study.
Right.
The last thing, I think the biggest one is oxidative stress, right,
Oh,
Gene?
yeah.
I mean,
That's right.
and it's a huge factor in terms
Free
of
radical city.
yeah, free radicals, right? And free radicals, always love that term, like the free radicals. What does that mean? Well, without getting too technical, a free radical is a chemical entity or compound that there needs to be two electrons paired to make that joint or whatever.
Yeah.
In balance, right? And the radical has only one, which means it's looking for something to pair to. And so what does that do? That cleaves DNA, right? It damages DNA. It amplifies inflammatory pathways, proteins and cell membranes. Okay, so all of that gets affected by free radicals and oxidative stress. Now, you do have some oxidative stress from working out, like we talked
Right.
about, to a certain point, and that's going to happen no matter what age you are, really.
Right.
It's how fast you recover from that. And I got to tell you, just taking creatine, I notice a more positive experience after workout than I do when I don't take it.
Sure. But again, that's more of an acute situation, right? Not
exactly
that chronic one.
It's not a chronic one. But anyway, this oxidative stress creates a vicious cycle, right? So it fuels inflammation, and inflammation produces more oxidative stress. So it's a cycle of how that happens.
So the key takeaway here, I think, is that these are molecular fire alarms that help us measure and modulate inflammation, and they are precisely what many nutraceuticals target, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yep. So how does chronic inflammation accelerate age-related decline? Let's talk about that for a little bit. And let's talk about the different parts of the body and what that means. So I'll start it off with the first one here. Brain. It's linked to cognitive decline, okay? Depression and Alzheimer's via neuroinflammation and microglial activation. So these things, and actually they still don't even know the full story of how Alzheimer's happens. There's been some studies. It's not something you can determine until after death of the person, where they can look at the plaques on the brain and stuff like that. And that's what I've understood.
Right. But certainly inflammation is involved.
Certainly inflammation is involved with that.
Okay. And then we have, possibly the most well-known aspect of inflammation and aging, and that is joints. That musculoskeletal problems that we have when we age. So a chronic activation of inflammation degrades cartilage as well as muscle. And remember, we have, everybody knows osteoarthritis, that's the joints. not everybody
Right.
is aware of sarcopenia, which is
No.
age-related muscle loss. So
Yeah.
again, that joints and musculoskeletal health is impacted by that chronic inflammation, that inflammaging.
Yeah. And if I was going to advise on that for myself of working out in the gym at my age or whatever, I can't lift the kind of weights I used to in my 20s, like 40 years ago, right? So
No.
when I was doing heavy weight training with my brother, I don't do that anymore. I don't need to do that. I don't. If I tried to do that, that would put me into that
Well,
chronic
Well,
inflammation.
you're in good company. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't lift like he used to.
No, he doesn't lift like he used to anymore either. And by the way, those guys that you see, they all did steroids. Okay, don't
Of course they did. Of course
don't
they
kid
did.
yourself. They didn't get
No.
looking like that without steroids.
No, listen, they put a hell of a lot of work into what they were doing. I won't try to say, oh, you got to shoot up with some testosterone, but
Yeah.
to get to that level,
Well,
everybody.
and they obviously you've got to have some good genetics there too as well already to build
absolutely,
on. But,
absolutely. But
anyway, sorry, we digress on that. But the next one is cardiovascular. So low grade inflammation damages vascular endothelium. That's the lining of the blood vessels. And also the heart, and increases arteriosclerosis and heart disease risk. So
I just want to add to that, that when you say it damages the vascular endothelium. So imagine, folks, that the inside diameter of your arteries gets damaged. What happens when it gets damaged? Well, your body's got to try to repair it. So what does it do? It starts sending things out to patch it up. Maybe a little cholesterol, a little fiber, a little calcium, patching it up. And now an artery that was this big of a dimension becomes like this, and like this, and like this, and eventually you get a heart attack.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah. So,
and that's linked to metabolic health, right?
Metabolic health, and you and I both have family histories of this kind of an issue. So, metabolic health, inflammatory cytokines disrupt insulin signaling, and that impacts type 2 diabetes, makes it worse, and it also impacts obesity, metaboflammation, if you will, or meta-inflammation, if you will, whatever. But, both in my family and in your family, we've had close relatives that have had type 2 diabetes and that have died from complications of type 2 diabetes. And so, it's near and dear to our hearts. And so anything that we can do from an anti-inflammatory standpoint, naturally, to help reduce this is a huge, huge deal.
Exactly. The next is the immune system. We've already mentioned that. So this chronic inflammation actually promotes immunosenescence, and that is aged, exhausted immune cells can't respond effectively anymore. They can't do their job they're supposed to do because they've been impacted by this chronic inflammation.
That's right. And then, of course, probably the most obvious of the signs of aging is your skin. You can tell how if somebody looks older by their skin, and more wrinkles. Well, what happens with inflammation is it accelerates the breakdown of collagen. And when you get breakdown of collagen, you get that thinner skin, you get more of cross-linking of molecules causing wrinkles, and you get that visible signs of aging. That is the most obvious sign of inflammaging. And that's something that we often want to try to do something about.
And if you know anybody who's a smoker, for example, you'll notice huge degradation in skin and aging, especially around the lips. You'll see a lot of lines where that you can tell that's from somebody
what's
who smoked
interesting, I have some friends close to my age. They're twins, little ladies. One of them smoked, one of them didn't.
The other one.
They are identical twins. But there's no question when you look at them who the smoker has been.
Yeah, no question.
Even though she stopped like a couple decades ago, you can still see it.
Yeah, and that's once you've done that damage to your body, a lot of times it's going to stay with you the rest of your life, unfortunately.
Ooh, I hope they're not listening to this podcast. That would be embarrassing.
Sorry.
Oops.
So here's your takeaways for that about chronic inflammation. It's the common denominator across age-related decline. No question about it. It's a major deal. So modulating it isn't just about symptom relief, all right, taking a product or whatever. It's about health span and longevity. So it is about living a proactively healthy lifestyle. I mean, eating right and all these things are factors that can impact this, right?
Right.
And so on. So that leads us into Gene to
the
kind of
fun part.
fun part. All the ingredients in this space that will give us that have evidenced research that show support for inflammation. So anyway, let's let you start it off.
Let's jump into botanicals and extracts. And folks, there are so many botanicals. We are just scratching the surface here.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are literally dozens and dozens of botanicals that have anti-inflammatory properties. We're just going to hit on a couple. So, let's start with two well-known ones, curcumin from turmeric and boswellia. And also the combination of the two. There was a fairly recent randomized controlled trial just this year found that a bioavailable combination of them reduced inflammatory pain and inflammatory markers, including some of the interleukins. And that took place over 28 days. So that was pretty cool. And then there was another one, again with boswellia, but this time they added a little omega-3s, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that combination improved joint recovery and reduced soreness in athletes. That was a randomized controlled trial in just 2023.
Yep. So really recent. Yep. And so we're just like Gene said, we're just highlighting some key ingredients with most recent research. So let's take the nutrients and lipids category. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is omega-3s. We did a show on this and we deep dived that. And also SPMs, which are self-promoting mediators, right? Is that the acronym for that? For No.
No, it's pro-resolving mediators.
Oh.
And don't feel bad. I had to quickly check my notes to remember.
Pro-resolving mediator. Well, okay, what are those? Resolvins, protectants, mericin.
Specialized pro-resolving mediators. So SPMs, that's good enough.
That's what it is, specialized pro-resolving mediator. I had the acronym right. There you go.
You did.
But they're derived from EPA DHA, right? Which is
right. Well, there's and they're sort of a subset there, and you got those different kinds,
Right. And the best way to think about these, and I don't think a lot of people know about SPMs, Gene, and so they know about omega-3, but they don't really know the importance of SPMs. And there are a few ingredient companies out there that really promote this aspect. They support inflammation resolution, and also there's been preclinical and tissue studies that supports this mechanism, okay? But I think the best way to think about them is they're the body's system already built in to actually, help with inflammation issues. So, our bodies are pretty amazing organisms, right? They're really complex and they can do a lot of things. It's an amazing machinery, so to speak, and how it can react and adjust to all these sorts of things.
Oh yeah,
but it can only go so far.
When I used to work for Twin Lab, we had a product at Omega, a product that with the pro-resolving mediators that we kind of described the function of them as helping as kind of a governor on inflammation. And so, these are very cool. And I think they're, like, to your point, they're underplayed. People don't know enough about how wonderful these things are. So,
yeah. Actually, let me take the next one in probiotics, since that's a specialized area that I've done a lot of work in. But
absolutely.
The gut immune axis, right? So obviously we understand that for the immune process, which inflammation factors in there, most of the receptors are in the GI tract, more than 70%, right? So
that's right.
In fact, they call the gut the second brain. So there's been a lot of recent human studies that show that probiotics lower inflammatory and oxidative biomarkers. So that includes like C-reactive protein, CRP, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, and especially in metabolic disorders. So this was a meta-analysis that was just done this year that investigated that. The other is And by the way, there's a lot of probiotics, including postbiotics, by the way,
Yeah, absolutely.
that have some impact in this area. And there's another one, a recent study showed with L-Plantarum Heal 9. I forgot who produces that now. I used to know that. Can't remember the company that makes
listen,
that.
I don't want you to feel bad about that because I actually wrote an article on it and I can't remember.
So that plus berries reduce systemic. And by the way, why berries? Because there's polyphenols, and it's a prebiotic source for the probiotic,
Mhm.
biotic, and reduce systemic and joint inflammation in older adults with low-grade inflammation. So they weren't looking for the chronic inflammation, but acute, and it showed a benefit there with that. So that's actually pretty cool. But there's a lot more out there in this space on probiotics, postbiotics, that in terms of targeting inflammation.
Absolutely. Well, one of the other areas that's interesting is there's other compounds that you could find in different plants. One of them is PEA, or palmitoyl ethanolamine. And did I pronounce that right? Palmitoyl
Ethanolamide.
ethanolamide. I knew I did something wrong. So PEA. So even as guys who know a lot will mispronounce these things from time to time.
And I'm a PhD chemist in organic chemistry, so
yeah, and my doctorate's in botanical medicine, so you'd think, but no, we still mispronounce these. But anyway, it's a very interesting molecule. It does a lot of very cool things, but there's actually a fair amount of research on it. In fact, if you look at a meta-analysis, which is just a study published where they looked at several clinical trials and kind of put together the totality of the results of those, and and they do it based on a mathematical equation to really say, okay, yeah, this is meaningful. The meta-analysis confirmed that PEA had effectiveness and safety in chronic pain management, and it functioned via immune and neuroinflammatory modulation. So again, a very cool ingredient to consider using if you are interested in helping to reduce inflammation or creating a product that has a good anti-inflammatory effect. And you should know, that's not it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on PEA, and there's ongoing trials looking at inflammatory pain, lean mass, recovery, and resistance training protocols. So there's a lot going on there.
Yep. The next one is quercetin, which is ubiquitous in nature. I mean, it's in numerous botanicals, anything from, actually, I think St. John's wort, echinacea for sure. I know it's in that. It's also in coffee beans, the coffee fruit, and stuff like that. So it makes sense. It's a polyphenol that's
and
part
citrus,
of those.
some of the citrus as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's in a lot of different. So there's a lot of different extracts or ingredients that contain quercetin, right?
And not only ubiquitous in nature, but ubiquitous in a lot of supplements. You find sometimes not enough, but you'll find little bits of it in there.
No, I think it's a standalone supplement. You can buy that, but it's in a part of a lot of botanicals already. That's already in there. So just to give you a couple examples, there was a study, double-blind, randomized control trial this year that showed that quercetin significantly reduced vascular inflammation and markers of anti-inflammation. So anti-inflammatory. I can't hard pronounce. I can't get over that term.
Anti-inflammatory.
I'm just going to say aging inflammation. It's easier. Okay.
Works for me, buddy. Works for me.
The second thing was there's been some mechanistic reviews highlight quercetin's role in modulating pro-inflammatory cytokines and enzymes. So I would say that there's certainly a lot more nutraceutical ingredients here that if they actually did the study on inflammation, probably would find some benefit or whatever. And so, but again, this is just a tasting of what's out there, and there's certainly more.
Now that you have just sort of a very scratched the surface kind of exposure to some of these nutraceuticals and their anti-inflammatory effects, now you want to give some thought to, if you're in the industry and you're trying to formulate something, on sort of some, let's call it the best practices. And one of the things I want to there's a couple of things I want to emphasize, but one of them is, and I say it again and again, and I know you do too, Bill, for all that's holy, use clinically relevant doses of the nutraceuticals shown in human research to be effective for the purpose intended. All right, please use clinically relevant doses. And yet, how many products out there, Bill, do you see in any category, anti-inflammatory or not, that do not use them? You see it all over, right? So
I see it all over, and actually, we're going to get to the real answer of that sometime next year with the launch of Nutraceuticals app.
We are indeed. So you
anyway.
Want to use those clinically relevant doses, but the other thing is you want to consider things like delivery systems. So if you think there's some nutraceuticals like turmeric and its curcuminoids that have very low bioavailability, often as low as 1%. So anything that can be done, and there's a number of different kinds of delivery systems out there that can help improve the bioavailability, or something like omega-3s, you can use emulsions of them that improve bioavailability. And then, of course, there is the whole aspect of synergies. You want to say something about that, Bill?
Sure. And again, it's a when you're looking at this, and we've talked about this before in a podcast, right, Gene? When you're formulating products, you obviously want to look at a multi-vector approach to this, where you're targeting different markers or different parts of that indication that are
different mechanisms of action there. Yeah.
Right. Different mechanisms of action. You know, it could be in the beginning of a process, middle, or the end of a process, and how you formulate there. And again, there's already been some preliminary research on certain combinations, like Gene talked about curcumin and boswellia. Of course, omega-3s with other antioxidant ingredients, probiotics with other botanicals. I mean, the sky's the limit here in terms of combinations of what's the best thing.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there's probably not a lot of research on certain combinations specifically, because there's really a lack of clinical research on the product as a whole. We know this, right, Gene? So, so if you are going to play around with combinations and say there is a lot of research on several different ingredients, understand the mechanisms of action, and then come up with a formulation, then do the study on the product as a whole. Okay.
Yeah. And to your point, Bill, just to your point, when you are saying, okay, let me use nutraceuticals with different mechanisms. So if you've got something that really hits interleukins hard, fantastic. And then you got something else that really hits C-reactive protein, and something else that's a LOX inhibitor, whatever. If everything you get that you put in there is all focused on C-reactive protein, well, that's fine, but you're not going to have it. It's redundant. You're better off approaching the problem using different mechanisms. And nutraceuticals that address those.
Exactly. And then you don't want to go too far with that and say, oh, no, I want to put everything out there to the kitchen sink approach.
Please, I hate that.
Yeah, don't.
Makes me crazy.
There's a reason it's called that. It's like, if you've ever seen a kitchen sink full of dirty dishes after dinner that my daughter doesn't want to wash, it's because it's all thrown in there. All the different things are in there. You don't want to do that. You want to go too far. Again, you want to use clinically relevant dosage. You want to be really rigorous about that. And of course, don't think that more is better. Like if that's the other factor here, not just putting everything in there and like saying, oh, I'm going to make a supplement. It's got curcumin, boswellia, omega-3s, probiotics, and quercetin, right? You don't just put all that together in a formulation, whatever. One, you'd have to have clinically relevant doses. You need to examine the mechanisms of action. But also, beyond that, you want to, this kitchen sink approach is that, I think we already said it, redundancy or whatever, but I had another thought there. Sorry.
Well, we also call it fairy dusting, where you just toss in little bits of stuff and go, isn't this wonderful? No, it's not. If you can't, then that goes under the category, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, you baffle them with bullshit.
That's it. Well, I think we said enough about that formulation and best practices. We tout that all the time, of course, And that's the way we approach innovation in our industry in terms of our careers. That's how we approach it.
It's the ethical way and the responsible way to do it.
Right. So let's wrap it up, Gene. Let's summarize here a little bit. Again, we haven't talked about all the different nutraceuticals out there involved in the inflammatory process. It's pretty vast. But there's certainly a role for nutraceuticals in taming chronic inflammation and also
there is indeed
treating the acute, both actually. So again, think about that from a standpoint of, here's what the thing I was going to say in formulation now. Think of this as a proactive approach, right? Not to when you're, that was what I want to try and say, to not like after you already have chronic inflammation and a disease state that you got a problem. Yes, you can help that a little bit, but at some point there's a point of no return in that, right? And I can speak specifically in diabetes with that. My father was a diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and he knew for years that he had to manage that, and he didn't live the healthy lifestyle to do that, unfortunately. And the kidney doctor was very frank with him and said, look, if you keep going like this, you're going to end up in dialysis and you're going to be dead in 2 to 3 years after that. So he didn't sugarcoat it. So that's the reality.
Right. And let me just make a point. You talk about being proactive. So I just want to mention an example. So some of you have had genetic tests like 23andMe, the health ones, and some of them give you what genes that you have, what variations on those variants you might have that could put you at higher risk. Well, I happen to be at very high risk for macular degeneration. But knowing that, I said, aha, I know what's really good for macular degeneration. And one of the things I started doing was using 20 milligrams of lutein, 4 milligrams of zeaxanthin, because there is a plethora of data showing that was extremely helpful in preventing macular degeneration. I've been doing that for years. So far, no signs of macular degeneration. So taking a proactive approach, I think, is exceptionally good advice, Bill, and I'm glad you gave it.
Yeah, it's definitely the approach you want to take as a consumer, which we are as well, but also, like I was pointing out, in formulating as a best practice, you want to think about in a proactive approach. You don't want to, we're not treating disease, right? We're trying to move us to evidence-based formulation and supplementation for consumers. That's where we want to go. And we want to promote a proactive, healthy lifestyle.
We do. And we want to always make sure that we are using evidence-based formulation for long-term benefits, including longevity benefits. So always make sure that you, in addition to just using nutraceuticals and taming chronic inflammation, that you make sure that you've got the evidence to show that this does that. And that could be evidence from existing studies, or if you want to go gold standard, then you conduct your own clinical study. And if you're not sure how to do that, contact Bill. He actually acts as a primary investigator for studies, and he can help set you up.
Yep, I can definitely do that. And so we've got, that about does it for this episode. Now, what do we have coming up? I mentioned in the beginning, Gene's traveling here for the rest of the month. So we're going to probably come back to you guys in early October. And then Gene, I think we'll do again our second time because we launched Bioactive Nexus at Supply Side last year. And I'm glad they changed the name, by the way, because
Supply Side Global?
Yeah, because I kept telling people Supply Side West, and I said, this is the biggest international show. And people would argue with me, no, it's not like that. Finally, they changed the name to represent truly what it was, right? It really isn't a global show.
I've warmed up to it. When they first did it, I thought, oh, no, they changed the name. Everybody knows it's Supply Side West. They changed the name, and a bunch of marketing people, blah, blah, blah. And then I started to warm up to it. Well, I guess they got a good point. It is a global phenomenon.
It has certainly evolved into that. So Gene and I will both be there at the end of October in Las Vegas. So we'll give you more details. We'll put it out in LinkedIn primarily here in terms of dates and stuff like that. And we haven't finalized the format of what we're going to do at the show there. We're still talking about that. They didn't really have a place to do the podcast. We did it in the press room, but we'll see what happens with that this year. But anyway, that's where we're at, folks. That's what's coming up between now and the end of October. Everybody's gearing up for Supply Side Global for sure. And but we'll talk to you, see you when we see you, I guess, right?
Indeed. Maybe I'll have some interesting tidbits from abroad to share.
Yeah, actually, we could do that in the next show in the beginning of October when you come back from Shanghai, right? That's where you're going, right?
That's right.
It's a wellness.
Longevity, biohacking, longevity, and all of that.
Cool. Yeah, well, that ties right in what we're talking about, biohacking and all that. So, and also one last thing I want to talk about what's happening with Nutraceutical. If you haven't been keeping up with all the news on that, lots of exciting things happening with that. We've since the last time we did the podcast have launched our ingredient science and product science accelerator program. So if you're interested in talking to me about that, if you're an ingredient company industry or a product company, you want to come in and join this first cohort. It's really special, founder pricing, but also positions you as a preferred partner with Nutraceutical. So that's already happening, ongoing discussions with both product brands and ingredient companies right now as we speak. I'll have more news about that later, hopefully before Supply Side. That'll be exciting. So stay tuned for that. And then the launch of our consumer app is still on track for beta version in Q1 next year, and then Q2 marketplace version or commercial version. So we're working our way towards that. So it's super exciting times, Gene. We're going to change the industry. I mean, we're already talking about it, but Nutraceuticals is going to be the vehicle. We're going to put that power back in the hands of the consumers where they can totally do that.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Amen, brother. Okay, take us out of here. Y'all have a great weekend and see you soon on the Bioactive Nexus.